That late summer Tuesday in San Francisco had a lingering smell of reheated coffee and the threat of rain, though it never quite materialized. Elena worked in her tiny studio like someone silently tuning an expensive instrument. She wore a gray sweatshirt, her hair tied back with a cheap pen, and two monitors bathed the countertop that served as her desk in cold light. The counter was covered in papers with underlined margins and a yellow post-it note that read, 60 Mays or die. On the floor, and tea. Ethernet cable snaked across the room like a vine, weaving under the baseboard and reappearing next to the router, which was heating up as if it were breathing. From the window, she could hear the metallic screech of a streetcar, and the sun, low on the buildings, cast a slanted line across the peeling wall. On the main screen, a 186-page contract awaited her signature. On the secondary screen, latency graphs moved like a healthy cardiogram. No one inside would call it an empire, and yet, every tiny detail seemed to support a 42nd floor in a tower that shone from miles away. The ordinariness of the place was its best disguise, a kitchen that smelled of stale toast, a wobbly stool, and a long-suffering plant that had survived too many early mornings. Elena checked the wire transfer amount one last time, that figure many would repeat as a myth, which appeared on her screen stark and precise, USD 340,000 fasu, ready to be transferred with a single click. The legal department had left her a message on Slack about the electronic seal. Finance sent confirmations with metronomic punctuality, and she, her shoulders weary from hours at the keyboard, breathed, measuring the time between notifications. When her phone vibrated, it wasn't with its usual sound, but with the sensation of an object falling without breaking. The market crashed. You're on your own now. It was her father, believing he was speaking from the pinnacle of a truth that was never his. Unaware that the tightrope keeping the family safe had been stretched taut by Elena for 5 years, transfer by transfer. She reread the message, not to understand it, but to accept that this day had long since been written, that her double life could no longer fit in a small apartment or in such silence. She put the minutes away, blinked twice slowly, and opened the folder containing the real-life statements, the secret map of how she had quietly maintained a house that she never wanted to admit was burning. For years, her father had told the story of the family fund, as if it were a brilliant investment epic, the kind that ends with a glass of wine and the word vision on everyone's lips. He said he had known how to read the markets. That chance had rewarded him for holding on when everyone else was selling. Elena listened in silence with a domesticated smile and sometimes nodded as if blessing a useful lie. No one suspected that this fund had been born from sleepless nights, from selling stocks prematurely, and from software she herself wrote to simulate stock market movements with the names of shell companies. Not her mother, who still believed in miracles, nor her brother Diego, who boasted about a scholarship that would never have existed without her. All of that mattered little until that day, when her father's message arrived with the tone of a divine warning. In her chest, something between pride and weariness contracted, as if the oxygen in a windowless room had finally run out. Marcus Chin, her banker in New York, was the first to call. "Miss Vasquez, your father has filed for consolidated estates. I didn't know you wanted to keep them separate." The words came in English, flawless, with that neutral tone of someone who doesn't mean to hurt, but always does. Elena was speechless for a second, staring at the monitor lights as if they could offer her refuge. "Send them," she managed to say, knowing the email would take less than 5 minutes to fly, toward a family storm that was already brewing. When she hung up, the echo of Marcus's voice hung in the air like a faint hiss. She opened another window, this time the laptop's camera. Her face reflected on the screen looked like someone who had just had an entire layer of skin ripped off. There were no tears or trembling, only a serenity that hurt more than any crying. Outside, the San Francisco sky was beginning to cloud over. The first attempt to call came from Diego. He didn't say hello. He just said with that mixture of surprise and reproach that only brothers manage. "What the hell did you do?" Elena listened to the ensuing silence, filled with stifled breaths, echoes in a room she imagined as luxurious and comfortable thanks to her own money. Then she heard her mother in the background, whispering her husband's name, as if asking for explanations would do any good. "Dad received the documents. He says all this is from you," Diego added. At that moment, a contradictory feeling washed over her, relief and panic. She had longed for years for the truth to come out, but not like this, not transformed into emotional ammunition. She wanted to explain that she did it out of love, out of fear of seeing them break down, but she understood that any words would be just noise amidst an inevitable collapse. When her father picked up the phone, his tone changed. It was a voice trying to sound firm, but the tremor betrayed the humiliation. "Was it you all this time?" he asked. Elena remained still, staring at the empty coffee cup, as if deep down she could find the answer she had been avoiding for years. "Yes, Dad, all of it." There was a long silence, the kind of silence that divides a life in two. Then he exhaled, as if the air weighed more than he could bear. "So it wasn't me who saved this family," he finally said. And she thought of all the times she had wanted to hear him acknowledge her efforts, but not like this, not with reproach and shame. For the first time, her voice sounded smaller than her father's, not from fear, but from exhaustion. The mother spoke next, her voice fragile, like someone torn between two loves. "Daughter, why didn't you tell us?" Elena closed her eyes. The question hurt more than any accusation. How could she explain that she did it for them, that her silence wasn't contempt, but protection? She remembered the nights she paid her mother's medical bills under pseudonyms, inventing foundations that didn't exist, and the emails she sent from fake accounts so her father would believe the banks trusted his financial vision again. All of it had been love, a weary love, but love nonetheless. "Because they wouldn't have believed me," she replied, her voice soft but firm. On the other end, no one knew what to say. The line was filled with breaths and an electric murmur that seemed to vibrate with the tension of the unspoken years. After hanging up, Elena sat by the window, watching the city lights come on one by one, as if each downtown office were a reminder of her own anonymity. She had built an empire without anyone noticing, and now that the truth was out, she felt not pride, but a strange kind of abandonment. In the reflection of the glass, she saw her face divided between two realities: the brilliant engineer who had created Avalon Digital, and the daughter who still sought approval from a father who never knew how to see beyond his failures. San Francisco breathed to the rhythm of engines and neon lights, and in that noise she found a faint, almost imperceptible comfort. For the first time in years, she had nothing left to hide. That night, he didn't sleep. He opened the reports from the last 5 years, line by line, checking every payment sent under names he no longer remembered. They were like ghosts from a parallel life. Horizon Ventures, Pacific Leaf Holdings, a Nice fund. Behind each name, an exact sum, a hidden intention. In a separate folder, he kept his father's old emails, where he boasted to friends about having succeeded again in the markets. Sometimes he reread them with tenderness, other times with anger. Now that entire archive felt like a coded diary of his own invisibility. He closed his laptop and sank down onto the sofa. The smell of plastic and hot wires filled the room, and in that artificial atmosphere, he felt a strange nostalgia for something that never truly existed. A family united by truth. The next morning, the phone rang again. It was Marcus once more, apologizing for the misunderstanding. He told her that her father had requested the joint accounts be frozen, presumably to review the source of the funds. Elena thanked him politely, but her mind was elsewhere. In the tower, the Avalon Digital employees were starting their workday, oblivious to the domestic drama unfolding on the other side of the country. From the building's terrace, the view of the bay was a serene line of light, but inside, everything was turbulent. She considered canceling her meetings for the day, but decided to attend. If there was one thing she had learned from coding, it was that systems only stabilize if they keep running. She entered the conference room on the 42nd floor, with the same calm as someone crossing a bridge they know is fragile. The employees stood when they saw her. Some greeted her respectfully, others with a mixture of admiration and fear. She was the woman who had built from the ground up a company that processed millions of data points per second, but who still preferred to wear sneakers and her hair pulled back casually. As she spoke about the new agreement with a European multinational, her mind drifted to another conversation, the one she would have to face that night with her family. Her throat tightened, though her voice remained firm. The screens displayed projections, percentages, growth. None showed the human side, the story behind the success. A daughter who made herself invisible so that others wouldn't feel inferior. After the meeting, he retreated to his private office, a quiet room overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge shrouded in mist. He kept few personal belongings there: an old photograph of Diego as a child, a letter from his mother written during chemotherapy, and a silver pen that had belonged to his father, the same one he'd used to sign the closure of his restaurant before losing everything. He'd kept it as a symbol of resilience. Now it felt more like a burden. As he held the pen between his fingers, he thought about how something so small could contain so many layers of history. It was ironic. He'd created systems capable of sustaining empires, but not one that could sustain a family. Outside, the sun was breaking through the fog, and the reflection of his face in the glass made him look like someone who had just been reborn. That afternoon in the elevator, a young employee stopped her to thank her for an internal scholarship program Elena had quietly spearheaded. "It changed my life," she said shyly, unaware that she was speaking to the person who had funded it out of her own pocket. Elena smiled, nodding with that usual discretion that sometimes confused modesty with aloofness. When the doors closed, she took a deep breath. The anonymous recognition moved her more than any headline or statistic. Sometimes she thought that this anonymity was both her refuge and her punishment. In the light-filled, glass-walled corridors, her name was synonymous with efficiency, but no one knew the story behind it. A daughter who hid her greatness for fear of wounding others' pride. That night she decided to reply to her father's message, not with anger, but calmly. She wrote that she wanted to see them, face to face, at the family home in Palo Alto. "Not to justify myself, but to bring closure," she added. Deep down, she knew that this encounter would be like a merciless mirror. She prepared for the trip without telling anyone at the company, took an early train, and watched from the window as the cityscape dissolved into orderly suburbs. As the train moved along, she rehearsed every detail of what she planned to say, and for the first time in a long time, she felt real fear, the fear of being seen without her masks. If you've made it this far, you probably understand what it's like to hide a part of yourself to avoid breaking up with what you love. Tell me where you're reading this from. I'd love to know. Her parents' house was still the same, with the perfectly manicured lawn and the scent of waxed wood that always made her think of falsely peaceful Sundays. When she opened the door, her mother hugged her with a mixture of relief and confusion. Diego was on the sofa, staring at the television screen without really seeing her. Her father, on the other hand, stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes on the floor. The scene had something theatrical about it, as if they had all rehearsed their roles before her arrival. Elena put her bag on the table and waited for someone to speak first. It was her mother who broke the silence. "Daughter, you have no idea how much we've been thinking about you since we found out everything." Elena smiled sadly. In truth, no one knew anything yet. Her father turned to her. He had aged more than she remembered. Slumped shoulders, a weary gaze, a wounded dignity clinging to pride. "We didn't need your charity, Elena," he said, his voice restrained. She watched him, not responding immediately. It wasn't charity, she thought. It was survival. She had nurtured the illusion that he had managed to rebuild his life, because she knew that without that illusion her father wouldn't have endured. "I never meant to humiliate you," he explained. "I just wanted us to be okay." But the words drifted between them like smoke. In that room filled with memories, each felt a stranger to the other, as if they belonged to different eras, incompatible versions of the same family. Diego broke the silence with unexpected sincerity. "I didn't know anything, Elena, and now I don't know whether to thank you or ask for your forgiveness." She looked at him and saw in her brother the boy she had protected from late payments, from the collection letters she hid so as not to worry him. "You don't have to thank me," she replied. "Just understand why I did it." Diego nodded slowly, realizing that behind the family's success story was a woman who had bled herself dry in silence so that no one else would have to. The mother, her eyes moist, reached out to touch his cheek. "You're stronger than I imagined," she murmured, as if she had just discovered her own daughter. Her father, however, didn't move. He continued staring at the floor, his lips pressed tightly together, his breath held. Elena remembered the times he had said that women don't understand business, and how those words had cut so deep into her heart that she vowed to prove him wrong without saying a single word. "I didn't want to compete with you, Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "I just wanted us to be safe." Then he looked up. There was something broken but also human in his expression. "And we are," he replied, more to himself than to her. There was no pride in that sentence, but a silent surrender that tasted to Elena like an incomplete reconciliation, but enough to keep her breathing. The conversation stretched late into the night. Her mother prepared tea, a small but meaningful gesture of reconciliation, and poured it into the cups she always reserved for important guests. Elena spoke without drama, recounting how she had built Avalon Digital from her apartment, how each step forward was an act of resistance rather than ambition. She told them that she slept next to the server for the first few months, that she had sold her old car to pay for a software license, and that she often cried in front of the screen, unsure if she would make it. Her voice broke as she recalled the years when no one inquired about her, convinced that she was still looking for a stable job. For the first time, her family truly listened to her, not to the silent daughter, but to the woman who had built an empire without witnesses. When he finished speaking, the father slowly rose and approached the table. He took the cup in his hands and with a long sigh said, "I don't know how to apologize for not seeing you sooner." The phrase sounded strange coming from him, as if it belonged to another language, but at that moment it was enough. Elena looked at him with a mixture of tenderness and exhaustion. She had waited half her life for this acknowledgement, and now that she had it, she felt more free than happy. Diego stood up and hugged her from behind without saying a word. The mother smiled, and for a moment the house felt like a home again. Outside, the wind rattled the blinds as if applauding their attempt to start over. Over the next few days, something shifted in the key family dynamic. Her father's messages no longer carried the tone of orders or advice, but rather curiosity. He asked how the company worked, what cloud computing meant, and if everything could really be stored in the air. Elena answered patiently, and although she sometimes sensed his bewilderment, she also perceived a newfound respect in his voice. Her mother began emailing her recipes, as if she wanted to make up for lost time with small gestures. Even Diego started offering her help, asking for advice on his projects, and for the first time, their conversations didn't revolve around what the family needed from her, but rather what they could build together. One afternoon, while reviewing the final figures before the IPO, Elena was surprised to see an unexpected message from her father. "Your mother says you'll be in New York for the IPO. We want to be with you." It was a simple sentence, but full of reconciliation. She took a few minutes to reply, letting the weight of the words sink in. These small miracles, the ones that don't make the news but heal wounds, are the ones that truly matter. The trip to New York was unlike any she'd taken before. She wasn't alone anymore, hidden behind an alias or a corporate pseudonym. This time, her family was with her, and every step they took through the brightly lit streets of Manhattan had the taste of a life reclaimed. At the hotel, her mother kept gazing out the window, marveling at the yellow taxis and neon signs. "I never imagined being here with you, like this," she kept saying. Elena watched her silently, savoring this newfound innocence. Diego was busy checking the event calendar while her father, always elegant, tried to appear calm, though his eyes betrayed his astonishment. Inside, Elena felt a mixture of exhilaration and peace. The world was finally going to see her, and this time, she wouldn't have to hide. The day of the IPO dawned with an almost unreal blue sky. In front of the NASDAQ building, giant screens displayed the Avalon digital logo and the name Elena Vasquez in white letters against a blue background. She walked to the podium accompanied by her family, feeling the pulse of the crowd and the murmur of the journalists. For a moment, she remembered the small kitchen in San Francisco, the smell of cold coffee, the yellowed post-it note, and the withered plant in the window. All of that had been part of the journey. When the clock struck 9:30, the sound of the bell inaugurated a new chapter. The stock price soared, and the cameras captured the moment her father embraced her, murmuring, "Now the world will know who you are." Elena smiled, not because of fame, but because of the recognition she needed most, that of her own family. After the ceremony, the press surrounded her with questions about figures, strategies, and growth. Elena answered professionally, but her mind was elsewhere, in her father's embrace and in her mother's moist eyes. As the flashes of cameras blinked, she noticed Diego watching her from the side, with a mixture of pride and gratitude. For the first time, he was introducing her to everyone as "my sister, the founder," not the programmer, not the computer girl. That simple definition held more value than any number on the NASDAQ screen. The public success, so noisy, contrasted sharply with the calm she felt inside. That night they celebrated at a small restaurant, the kind of place her father would have scorned years before for its lack of status, but which now felt warm and real. They toasted with white wine, laughed at old anecdotes, and allowed themselves for the first time in a long time to speak without masks. Elena watched her family laugh under the soft lights and understood that the true achievement wasn't in the millions raised, but in that moment of shared peace. The wounds hadn't disappeared, but they were healing. When her father raised his glass and said, "To the woman who saved us without asking for anything," she knew that this was the validation she had waited for her entire life. As the days passed, the media frenzy subsided. Avalon Digital established itself as one of the most solid companies in the market, and Elena began delegating tasks to reclaim something she had forgotten: personal time. She moved to an apartment with an ocean view, without whirring servers or cables on the floor, just the sound of the waves and the aroma of fresh coffee in the mornings. There she began writing a book, not about technology, but about silences, an attempt to understand why love sometimes takes the form of a secret. On every page, a memory of her family surfaced: her mother's voice, arguments with her father, Diego's laughter. Everything took on new meaning in the light of sincerity. Her story inspired many. Young women from all over the world wrote to her, sharing how they had found strength in their own shadows. Elena responded to each one patiently, reminding them that strength isn't always shouted. Sometimes it's cultivated in silence. In conferences and interviews, she spoke about the importance of building without needing to prove anything. And although many called her the Invisible Engineer, she smiled at the nickname. Invisible she had been, yes, but by choice. Now she understood that true visibility isn't about being seen by everyone, but about being recognized by those who truly matter. As the months passed, Elena realized her life was beginning to settle into a new tranquility. The media still mentioned her, but no longer with the initial astonishment. Now they treated her as part of the landscape of major tech figures. However, fame didn't matter to her. Her greatest achievement was being able to visit her parents without hiding behind excuses, share a quiet dinner without discussing money or business, and see her mother laugh without a care in the world. Sometimes she thought that the whole journey, the sleepless nights, the years of silence, the constant fear of being discovered, had been a complicated way to get back home. But she understood that some paths are only completed when you dare to stop justifying yourself. A year after the IPO, Avalon Digital celebrated its anniversary in the same tower where it had all begun. The view from the 42nd floor was still the same, but she wasn't. As employees toasted and the air filled with lights and laughter, Elena went to the window and gazed at the city stretching out to the bay. San Francisco, with its wires, hills, and mist, seemed to reflect back to her a more serene version of herself. She thought of her father, who now boasted about her with almost childlike pride, and of her mother, who had recovered her health. She smiled. She finally understood that she hadn't lost anything by hiding for so long. She had simply been waiting for the right moment to be seen. That night, when everyone had left and the tower lights dimmed, Elena stood alone before the glass. In the distance, the reflection of the bridge shimmered like a line of code still being written. She took her father's old silver pen from her pocket and placed it on the table. She didn't do it out of nostalgia, but as a symbolic gesture of closure. She had carried that story for half her life, and finally she could let it go without fear. She gazed at the horizon and thought that perhaps true maturity doesn't come when one triumphs, but when one no longer needs to hide their truth. Back home, she turned on the coffee maker and opened her laptop not to work, but to write the final chapter of her book. She titled the page, "What Remains After Silence." She began by describing how solitude can be a refuge, but also a prison, and how love, when lived without pride, has the power to transform even shame into tenderness. As she wrote, a new notification popped up in the corner of the screen, a message from Diego with a family photo and the text, "Finally all together." Elena smiled. She closed the computer. Without saving the changes, there was no need. The story was already complete, and what came next would be, for the first time, just life.